of one organism on another through or across space and time. And this resonance is, I think, independent of distance in the sense that it doesn't fall off with distance in space or time. Now, if that's the case, then people learning something in one part of the world should influence people all around the world, as long as they're in similar conditions, without showing any diminution due to distance. And more generally, if this is the case, it means that events on one planet or in one star could influence those in other stars or planets, even in other galaxies. There could be morphic resonance effects working over huge distances in the universe.
Yes, you wrote, there is the possibility that most, if not all, new patterns of activity that appear on Earth have already appeared frequently elsewhere in the universe or previous universes. Morphic resonance from these systems may swamp the predicted effects elsewhere in the universe or previous universes. I told my children tales like this. For you, it's simply a possibility.
It's a possibility.
Not Arabian Nights.
No, I think it's a possibility. I mean, it's a possibility that I don't think everything that's happened here has happened everywhere else. And the reason I think that is for the empirical fact that apparent morphic resonance effects do seem to be detectable. You see, if morphic resonance effects are not detectable, if there's no improvement with time, there are theoretically three other possibilities. One is that morphic resonance is wrong as a theory, which I'm sure most people would think, probably I would too, if the experiments didn't work. The second is that morphic resonance that everything that happens here has happened on other worlds somewhere else so often that there's nothing truly new happening on Earth. So you wouldn't see these effects because everything would already be governed by established habits. Mm-hmm. The third possibility is that morphic resonance works from the future as well as the past, in which case everything that's going to happen will also influence what's happening now. And since we don't know what's going to happen, this makes the theory virtually untestable. But it's a theoretical possibility. So what I'm concerned with here is the way that the novelty of things on Earth, if morphic resonance experiments yield positive results, in other words, if things get easier and easier, if we can see habits building up in nature, then either this shows that morphic resonance doesn't work over astronomical distances, or it shows that what's happening on Earth, these events that we're studying, are truly original in the cosmos. And so therefore, this opens up a theoretical possibility, an institute of cosmic novelty that could be set up on quite a low budget, where you could find out what's happened over the whole of the rest of the cosmos by testing for morphic resonance with the crystallization of thousands of different chemicals, for example. Now, if some of these chemicals turn out not to show a morphic resonance effect, if the crystals form the same way at the beginning and go on forming the same way, showing no habit, no tendency to crystallize better or faster, then we can infer these compounds have existed in a crystalline form elsewhere in the universe. If we find ones that do show this learning experience, that show this build-up of habit, we can infer that these have occurred for the first time here on Earth. So we can actually map what's happened elsewhere in the universe on a low-budget terrestrial laboratory without any need for expensive space probes, space shuttles, or other space technology costing many billions.
Who'd have thought you could send pictures, sound and music through space and vast distances if television, radio and telephone had not been invented? Who'd have thought that a brainless thing with plastic sides could do calculations in seconds that would take us weeks if the computer hadn't been invented? To illustrate the point, take a person from the 14th century. Tell him that he'll be able in the future to see an area of London where a certain Mr. Sheldrake lives, without being in London himself. And that he'd be seeing the street as it was a few months earlier. Tell him he could preserve time in a tin can on a narrow strip. Such is the distance between us and Sheldrake's theories. Unless they are translated into practical applications, they remain scientific heresy, to be burned at the stake.
What changes things fast is if you find a way in which a scientific discovery can be applied. If it then becomes a matter of business, commerce, everyday activity, then it doesn't matter about the theory. My primary aim is not applications of morphic resonance. I'm simply saying that when it reaches the point where it's applied, which may not be very far off, then it will take on a kind of reality in our present cultural context that it won't have until there are actual applications.
What kind of applications do you think of as far as formative causation is concerned? What could be a technological application?
Well, there are several.
So that people suddenly are convinced, well, of course, Sheldrake is right.
Well, two possibilities. The first would be an educational application. If morphic resonance is involved in learning, then we may be able to find ways of enhancing morphic resonance so that we can greatly increase the efficiency of learning or training procedures. Already some of the experiments on morphic resonance have shown that people learning tasks on computers can learn them quicker after other people have learned the same thing. And if we can improve the conditions for learning or training, this would be something that could be applied within a few years, at least within commerce, probably not within schools and universities. They'd be the last. But within commerce and industry, people are not interested in theories, they're interested in what works. Another area would be, there's a possibility, it's a technical thing, that it's on the borderline of what's possible, but it's possible that there's that morphic resonance is at work in certain laser, the pathways lasers make when going through certain kinds of crystals. If this is the case, then it might be possible to develop a new kind of memory-based morphic resonance technology which would fit into modern optical computers. The new generation of computers will be optical. And if one had a computer that worked on morphic resonance, paradoxically, one might come far closer to something that Dennett and people dream of, namely an organic machine which would be capable of thought, memory, and indeed communication with other similar machines, because they'd resonate with each other around the world. No need for telephone lines, satellites, or normal means of transmission. It's possible, paradoxically, that morphic resonance could give the very kind of technology, of a kind of organic technology that Dennett and many others dream of. But in doing so, it would mean that we have to accept a basically organic way of thinking about the whole of nature. The old kind of machine metaphors would have to go or be superseded. Now that kind of application, which I'm discussing at the present with one of the leading Japanese electronic companies who are actually now doing research on this, could come true. And I don't know, I mean, it may not. It's an outside chance. Well, they and I both think it's an outside chance, 1 in 10, 1 in 100, I don't know. But if this happened, the world would be changed quite fast.
It is nearly 6 in the evening in Hampstead. The world will change at lightning speed if a certain Japanese electronics firm is successful. But just now, Sheldrake's wife is ill. The builders want to discuss the alterations to the basement, and there's little Cosmo, his son, who also deserves his attention. It's a disorganized farewell, though extremely gentlemanlike. Hours and hours after we started with Sheldrake's discovery on his grandparents' willow farm. Hours after we talked about what fascinated his children, their fascination with death, for instance.
He says, what happens when you die? See, and so part of it is that, of course, your body decays. He likes playing in the local, when we go to the church on Sundays, he likes playing in the graveyard of Hampstead Parish Church. There are old tombs, and they're all overgrown with ivy, and there are yew trees and so on. It's a very old and romantic and beautiful graveyard. So he loves hiding behind these tombs, and he's very interested in whether they've all got skeletons in them, which they have. And so he knows that bodies decay, that you bury them in graveyards and the body decays. So the question is, do you have any sense of life? So my best explanation to him is that it's like dreaming, since I believe there is some kind of conscious survival of death. The best way I can conceive of it is that our life is, as I said at the beginning, rounded with a dream, in the sense that when we die, it may be rather like dreaming. And if you have a very bad dream, a kind of nightmare, then that may be rather like hell. You can't wake up. The point is that after you're dead, you can't wake up anymore. So you're like trapped in dreams permanently. And when we dream normally, of course our physical body is lying in bed. But when we dream, we have the sensation of going to other places, talking to other people, seeing things, walking around, even flying. Now, none of these things that we're actually doing in our physical body. So we all have every night, even if we don't remember it, the experience of living in another kind of body, doing other kinds of things which our physical body is not doing. So we're familiar through years and years of dreaming, most of which we forget, most of which comes from our unconscious in ways that we're not aware of. Most of us don't pay much attention to dreams, yet we all have a dream life, which is a kind of parallel life to our ordinary life. Not in our ordinary body, but in what we could call our dream body, because we have an implicit body in our dreams, even if we're not aware of it. And this dream body then comes back into our physical body, and when we wake up, there we are. We've woken up, we forget about the dream.
But at the moment we are dying?
Well, at the moment we're dying, maybe the one way of thinking about the way we survive bodily death would be in a kind of dream body. Because, now, I leave aside the obvious question of what's the physical basis of the dream body. I'm just now talking about what we experience. Well, I mean, we can leave the brain out of it for the time being. I'm just talking about our actual experience. Our actual experience is of having another body in our dreams and of traveling to other places and seeing other things. And most people in most cultures for most of human history have believed that in our dreams we do, in some sense, travel outside our body. And sorcerers and shamans and witches have perfected the techniques of traveling consciously in dreams. In so-called lucid dreams, there's the ability, when you know you're dreaming, you can take control of the dream and use it to go and visit people in distant places, see what they're doing. And there are reports that people can really find out things they didn't otherwise know through this kind of dream travel. Anyway, this is something we find in all shamanic traditions and in all psychic traditions. So, just sticking to the evidence as we experience it, leaving out of it theories about the brain, we could then see that when we die there's this sense of continuation in the dream state. And you can then see there could be different kinds of dreams, and we all have our own kinds of dreams depending on who we are, what our personality is like, what our interests and desires are. So the post-mortal dream state that we're in would very much depend on the kinds of people we are and the kinds of memories and experience we've had. And I think that the traditional doctrines of life after death fit quite well with the kind of dream state. The nightmare would be like hell. Ordinary dreams, which are neither completely good nor completely bad, would be like the Catholic idea of purgatory, where there's a continued development. You continue after death to have some kind of psychic life, but it's not the psychic life of the ordinary waking state. I think it may be more like the psychic life of the dream state. And then there may be within that the possibility of sometimes there are totally blissful dreams when there's a kind of liberation from the ordinary limitations of dreaming, and that may be the kind of final liberation from that intermediate state, a kind of mystical experience within the dream, which is possible, which some people have. I've had some myself. So anyway, this is the analogy, this is my starting point, and you asked me how I talk about it to my 4-year-old son, and that's the answer. That's how I talk about it. Now, if I were talking about it to somebody like Daniel Dennett, I'd obviously have to be talking about it in a completely different way, because he'd immediately bring in the brain and his theories about the brain and so on, which would be a different kind of discussion.
Yeah, there's an illusion with that. An illusion is like he calls a dream.
Yes, they call it an illusion. Well,
Caused by this army of dumb idiots forming our brain experiences.
exactly. Well, I would say all that's just as much a theory as the other one, you see, that these are different theories. But one can start with experience. We all have experience of dreams.
We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little lives are rounded with a sleep.
Rounded with a sleep. I mean, the idea that our life is like a dream. I suppose so, yes. I mean, actually, I think it's the other way around. I think that when we die, or before we're born, it's probably more like a dream, and that it's as if our lives are rounded with a dream. And of course, dreams are part of sleep, so that still fits with what Shakespeare says.